everyone. My name is Katie. I work here at the Parthenon. Right now, I'm in my office. We're located underneath the main level of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee. And we're doing Ask an Archaeologist. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below. And some of you have already asked questions on our Facebook and Instagram, which is at Nashville Parthenon. So thanks for those who did. And if you have any more, just keep them coming and we'll try to answer them along the way. Let's see, I'm going to start with a little bit about me. I studied classical humanities in college, which basically means I studied ancient history. And I had some fantastic professors. One of them recommended I study abroad in Greece, so I did. And then my thought process became, okay, how do I go back? So I started volunteering at an excavation in Athens, which is the capital of Greece today. Back in the day, it used to be a city-state in ancient Greece. The Agora excavations is the longest running systematic excavation in Greece, started in 1931 with only a short interruption for World War II. And of course, for this summer, there's no excavations happening there. I did a summer of manual labor, doing excavating out in the field. And then the next year I supervised a sculpture inventory for about 5,000 sculptures or so, and a couple inscriptions along the way, but I really got to be hands-on with a lot of the artifacts that have been found, and some of them hadn't been seen since the storage facility was built in the 1950s. I also worked at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, where I worked in the archaeology exhibit, and I worked at Corinth Excavations, where I lived in a tiny village in Greece called Ancient Corinth. And there, every summer, every April, May, June, there's excavations that help the next generation of archaeologists with their field training. So members of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens can come learn how to dig at Corinth, which was a major city-state in ancient times. And if you think Athens had a great navy, let me tell you about Corinth. They had 4 ports, so I think they would have been great rivals in ancient times. Let's see. Some of the questions that we got today were about how someone gets involved in archaeology, and I thought, I mean, you know now, I studied it in college, but I always really liked art and I really liked history, and I wasn't so sure about science until I took some geology courses. So I would recommend, if you're someone who's interested in digging, like maybe that's dinosaurs and paleontology, or maybe that's artifacts and kind of our human past in archaeology, start studying art, start studying history, start studying science. And then if you get to high school, maybe there's a world history class, which would be a great thing to take, which is probably, you know, a social studies course, but you can learn about people who lived all over the world. And then in college, you might have a department for classical humanities. Maybe it's a history of art department, like here in Nashville at Vanderbilt University, or a classical and Mediterranean studies department. It also could be in an anthropology department. If you're interested in archaeology that happens right here in the United States, you could take an Anthropology 101 course and get started studying anthropology and archaeology right here in our neighborhoods. So that's a great way, is to start taking classes that interest you. There's also all sorts of lectures. If you're someone who likes listening to a scholar speak, there's lectures that happen online that get live streamed from Greece, from the American School all the time. You can come visit the Parthenon and learn about archaeology here as well. You can also find maybe a chapter, a local chapter of the Archaeological Institute of America. It's the oldest American archaeological organization. We have one here in Nashville. It's the Nashville Society, and they always try to do something really big for International Archaeology Day, which will be October 17th this year. There's also lectures and symposia that happen right here at the Parthenon, so you can come to one and meet an archaeologist from somewhere in the world who's going to share with you their interests and their research. Let's see. I've hinted a little bit. One of the questions we had was about if there's different archaeology in other places and in other places in the world. I mentioned anthropology is kind of the local, the United States American version of like Greek archaeology. You'd learn that in an anthropology course. And that could be a dig that is a Native American site, and there's a whole set of really important rules for Native American archaeological practices. There's also excavations in Greece, like I mentioned. That's kind of more my background. I have friends who work in Turkey, in Israel, in Egypt, in Italy, Spain, England. Where else? Some friends who study South American archaeology. Basically, anywhere where people have lived, there's archaeology that helps us learn about those people from the past. So maybe it's a certain area. Maybe you're really curious about Machu Picchu. Maybe you're really curious about the Parthenon. Maybe you're really curious about people who lived in your neighborhood thousands of years ago. There's a field of archaeology that helps you learn about those people in the past. And the archaeology is different in different places. So my college training was much more centered on Greek archaeology. So I learned a lot more about early Greek civilization, things like the geometric period, the classical period, the Hellenistic period. I didn't learn much about American archaeology because I focused so much on Greek history and Greek archaeology. We had another question that was about what's in your office, what's on your walls. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about some of the things here. We are in the Parthenon right now. You can tell I was wearing a mask until I started this video. I've got some fun things here to show you. This is one of the objects I brought in. One of my friends in ancient Corinth, her name is Maria. Shout out to Maria. She makes pottery. And this is a Corinthian style jar. It opens and you can put little trinkets inside. It's gonna be probably hard to see, but you might be able to notice some animal patterns on it and some of the lines on it. If you lived in Corinth a long time ago, this is the type of pottery based on the design that people would make in Corinth. So for me, this kind of reminds me of a place I lived for 4 years. This is a modern version, but it's hand painted, and this style is just like one from a long time ago. So it makes me happy when I see it, and if I need a small little storage place for anything. I also have something, and these I'm really excited about. Again, it might be kind of hard to see. These are skewings. If you can tell inside this jar, these are small pieces of gold leaf. Gold leaf is a super, super thin sheet of gold, even more thin than a facial tissue like puffs or Kleenex. And these are remnants that have come off the statue of Athena upstairs here in the Parthenon during dusting. So it's not pieces that are missing. It's the skewings, the extra pieces from the application process, from putting those gold leaf sheets on. And you always have a little bit of overlap so that there's no spaces between the sheets. And so these are some of those skewings, or small pieces, small little fragments. And we use these in educational programs sometimes here at the Parthenon, but it's also kind of cool to see exactly how thin that gold leaf is. And if you can imagine 8.5 pounds of this, that's what's on the statue. Because that's hard to see, I also have our handy dandy gold leaf sheet here. You can see how thin it is. It's in a plastic file protector that's that thin. And this is a sample piece. We have a couple other sample pieces that we use for educational programs here. What else? We had an exhibit last summer called Instrument Head by Michael Weintraub. We've got a drum up here. This is one of his photographs from that exhibition. Well, a smaller version at least. And we had some of them available in the store. He's a photographer who really kind of tries to show the character of each musician by hiding their face but giving you clues to their identity. So this one here has a drum and some drumsticks and some glasses, and maybe you can figure out who it is. Next to that, we have a portrait that has a purple background, and this is called Rose of Shiraz. It's one of my favorite paintings in our Cowan collection here at the Parthenon. Again, I took some art history courses in college, but for me, working here has been really fun to learn that there's an extensive American art collection. And this is one of the pieces that arrived here in between 1927 and 1929 and is now on display here at the Parthenon. It was painted in 1919, so it's pretty old. It's over 100 years old. And we have great discussions about this painting here. Some of my most memorable experiences here have been talking about the artwork and what we see and what we can find in some of the different paintings. So when I started working here, I thought, oh, it's going to be so fun to work in the Parthenon and talk about ancient Greece all day, and it is, but I've been really surprised with how much fun it is to get to share our Cowan Gallery, our permanent collection here with visitors from all over the world. Then also, I want to show you my favorite archaeological, really architectural feature. If you can tell in these blue posters, there's some squares. These are called Metapees. I love Metapees. This is my moment to nerd out a little bit. They're an architectural feature that's pretty high up on the building. So if you're looking at the Parthenon or a picture of the Parthenon, you can have oh, I've got one here to show you. Again, this might be kind of small for you, but if you're looking at the top, there's a triangle here. You can be a fancy archaeologist and call this a pediment. There's lots of sculptures inside because the Parthenon's pretty fancy. Underneath, you might be able to tell there's some decoration there. And those are a series of square metapees, just like in the pictures up above. And in between those, triglyphs, kind of like 3 bars. And metapees and triglyphs are my favorite architectural feature because sometimes the metapees are blank, sometimes they're empty or reserved, sometimes they have sculptures inside them. And here at the Parthenon, of course, we have sculptures in our metapees, just like the one in ancient Greece. And why I really like them is because they often tell stories of Greek mythology. So if you're interested in ancient Greece, you might also be interested in Zeus, Hera, Demeter, Artemis, all the famous Greek gods, and the stories about those Greek gods. And the metapees often tell really interesting stories and help the architects and the sculptors of the building basically say a message about the building. And it can be different depending on what temple you're looking at or what building you're looking at. And then there's also the Doric columns here. The Doric columns start off a little bit wider at the base, then they secretly curve out a little bit, about 1/3 of the way up, and then taper or narrow up at the top. And inside the Parthenon, we have Ionic columns, which are a little bit different. But studying the architecture of the Parthenon and other temples is something an archaeologist would do. It's something we do here at the Parthenon. And of course, every good archaeologist has their favorite feature, and mine just so happens to be those metapees and triglyphs. This way. Let's see if there's anything else we need to go over. I think I answered all the questions that were submitted. Oh, I didn't answer what's the most frequently asked question for archaeologists. I would say the #1 question archaeologists get answered is, have you ever found a dinosaur? And the answer is no, because that's a paleontologist. They're quite similar. There's different methods and kind of some different theories involved, but paleontologists dig dinosaurs, archaeologists study humans and artifacts and objects that people used in the past. So a tool that someone used, or a ceramic cooking pot that someone used in their house in ancient Greece or medieval Greece or any period would be something an archaeologist would look at. That's probably the number one question we get. I'm lucky because I used to work in a dinosaur exhibit, so I know my dinosaurs pretty well, but I also can help people start to begin to understand some of those differences. Another common question we get is, what's the coolest thing you found? And that's also an interesting kind of thing to think about, because archaeology is a big team project, and it's also destruction. So if you find something, nobody else can ever find it again. And chances are you found part of it. The person working there the day before you found part of it. The person working there tomorrow might be the one who helps remove it from the ground. So even though it is a big team effort, I found a couple things that I really like to tell stories about. One of them is probably, you might think it sounds like the least exciting thing ever, but I found a soil change. Woo! That was pretty exciting. Basically, when I was digging, I was really observing the soil or the dirt that I was looking at. And I was able to notice that there was a slight difference in that soil. It kind of got a little wetter, a little more clay-y, which is a word in archaeology. And I noticed that basically the texture seemed a little different. And at that point, I didn't really understand what that meant. And so I called over the supervisor and the assistant for the dig area, for the trench, and pointed out that I was noticing things were a little bit different. And we decided to stop and kind of close that context, or basically, take a break and analyze all the pottery and the small finds from that little area, so that when we started digging, we kind of were able to say these two things were from different layers. So the one that I was digging at was from this layer, and then whatever was underneath would be from the next layer, because I noticed that little tiny change in the layers of earth that we were digging. And then that layer underneath mine, again, I wasn't the one who discovered it, but one of my friends found part of a water pipe system. So that might explain why it was a little wetter. There was some water kind of in that area. And so I didn't find the water pipe. I didn't find the water pipe system, but I was paying attention, and I found the soil change, which for me was kind of a true test that I was doing archaeology and really focusing on what the ground and the soil was telling me, and not looking for a gold coin or for a big giant sculpture, which would be fantastic, but often it's the smallest details that give you the biggest clues about what was going on in that area in the past. Another really cool thing I found, I also got to research and process and inventory, which as a museum person was my favorite part. It was a small bone object about the size of a quarter, which might be, it might have been about like 2 or 3 centimeters in diameter, kind of across, and it had one hole in the middle. And I researched the collection and looked at other examples of similar bone objects that had been found. It was something carved out of bone, animal bone. And all the other examples I found were buttons. But what kind of button has one hole? So we were trying to understand, is this a button? Is it a pin? How exactly could it be used? And we came up with the idea that it could have been used to help gather clothing up at the shoulder, and perhaps a pin could be put through that hole of the button. And it is now cataloged as an artifact called Bone Object. So I love that bone object because it is still a little bit of a mystery. So yeah, those are probably the 2 things that I always give as answers when people ask, what's the coolest thing that you found? Of course, my team and folks that I've worked with have made incredible discoveries. One of them was We were working to do some conservation or help preserve this medieval area of Corinth, and we found a wall painting that had been preserved because it had been part of a wall of a medieval church, and likely when there was an earthquake or fire or some sort of bad destructive event that happened, the wall painting that was on the surface of the brick of this big giant stone, kind of fell down onto the ground and stayed there preserved for at least like 600 some years. So the wall painting, when we lifted that block up, we were able to see the face of an archangel on that wall painting. Brightly colored, very exciting, and I'm getting chills now just thinking about it, because sometimes when you think about the past, you think about things that were like fancy white stone, and every day we're learning more and more that the ancient world was a very vibrant, colorful place with wall paintings. The Parthenon itself would have been brightly painted, and probably lots of color around the marketplaces, around the buildings. So for me, that wall painting was a great example of a surprise find that really kind of opened our eyes to thinking about wall paintings in our town of Corinth, which was really, really exciting. And then it also, for a while, we stored it in the workroom as we were studying it, and it was kind of right across the desk from me, so I got to see it every day when I went into work. But I can't really complain because now I get to see the Parthenon every day when I come to work. I think that's it for now. If you have more questions, just add them to the comments. We can either try to answer them now, or we will do another session of Ask an Archaeologist. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you again soon at the Parthenon.